Hi, everyone. Welcome to Healthy School Meals for All, FRAC's new guide on building a state campaign hosted by the Food Research and Action Center. I'm Steve Hayward, FRAC's Communications Manager. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few brief housekeeping items. We expect this webinar to run about 60 minutes. We are recording the presentation and will send the recording and slides in a follow-up email. Closed captioning is available. To turn captions on, click Show Captions in the bottom taskbar and select English as the spoken language. We may have time for questions and answers at the end of this presentation. To ask a question at any time, please use the Q&A tab, also in the bottom taskbar. With that, I'll pass it off to Alexis Bylander, Director of Child Nutrition Programs and Policy at FRAC. Take it away, Alexis.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Steve, and thanks for everyone who's able to join us this afternoon. Let's go ahead and dive right in. The focus of this webinar is walking through FRAC's new Healthy School Meals for All State Advocacy Guide, and a link to the full guide will be available in the chat. I want to start by saying that this guide was informed by FRAC's work on Healthy School Meals for All over the last 5+ years, and the states that have passed Healthy School Meals for All policies or have current campaigns. A big thank you to the organizations that contributed ideas, learnings, insights, strategy, photos, and materials to inform today's conversation and to help other states. FRAC also gratefully acknowledges the individual donor who made the development of this guide possible. So let's get to it. This is how we're going to roll today. You'll see the table of contents for the guide here. We won't have time to cover every section of this in detail, but we'll follow the general flow of the guide and then stop along the way to hear from Leah Gardner with the Food Group in Minnesota, Alicia Sanders with the North Carolina Alliance for Health, and Lily Markham with the Tennessee Justice Center, so that we can hear insights from their state campaigns. Before we do that, I wanted to give a current nod to the political landscape that we're in right now. We have just seen historic cuts made to the SNAP program through budget reconciliation, which will undoubtedly hurt state budgets for the years to come. At the same time, the need for healthy school meals for all remains significant, and the opportunity for bold policies over the next few years will likely largely be at the state level. We know that each state has their own unique situation right now, and also that there are incremental steps to healthy school meals for all for you to consider, and we'll be walking through those in a little bit. So first, the guide covers why healthy school meals for all. Well, in today's webinar, we don't want to spend too much time talking about this subject, but rather focus on how these campaigns come together. But as a brief overview, we know that the current system is not meeting the need. It is riddled with school meal debt, stigma and shaming happening in school cafeterias, and operational inefficiencies in the system. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we had a little over 2 school years as an opportunity to pilot nationwide free school meals for all, and it was a success. And a lot of people realized during those years that they did not want to go back to a system of charging kids different prices for the same meal. And we really realized in those years that healthy school meals for all is the future for school nutrition and for schools. And today's webinar is focused on how we get there. So far, 9 states over the last 5 years are really showing us what is possible. They have passed policies as standalone bills, as part of budget bills, and in one case to date, a ballot measure. This map here shows you the states in green that currently have healthy school meals for all policies, and the states in yellow are places where that legislation has been introduced. One of the key first steps in creating a healthy school meals for all campaign is to pull together a coalition. And the great news is that this is an issue that really resonates with people. So to date, healthy school meals for all coalitions have tended to be pretty large. Back in 2021, FRAC did some message testing and found that the following campaign names appeal to voters: Feed the Kids, Healthy School Meals for All, Hunger-Free Students, and Hunger-Free Schools. And if you are here today thinking about starting a coalition, the great news is that there are so many examples already out there for you to draw on. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Lily to talk a little bit about her experience building a coalition.
Thanks, Alexis. So I'll start by saying we started in a very lucky position of having a lot of these partnerships built prior and having some big names that were willing to take a step towards this with us. But some of the partners that we've had the opportunity to work with include the Tennessee School Nutrition Association. So our state's School Nutrition Association, they have really just been instrumental in connecting us when it comes to stories, school visits, just general engagement and kind of grounding back into this work. We've also had the opportunity to work with Second Harvest Food Bank, American Heart Association, Save the Children Action Network, Ed Trust, quite a few other education partners. But I think the biggest thing is that we're always looking to include more and looking to and make this a broader subject so that more people are engaged in it. But I really think that the first step is just starting and sending a cold email if you're starting from square one. The amount of cold emails I've sent are quite lengthy. But again, it would not be fair to say that this was all from zero. It's been years long work of building partnerships and getting everyone to the place where they're ready to come together on this issue.
Excellent, thank you. So when you think about what your coalition members will be able to contribute to the campaign, there's so many options. They could contribute staff time, access to their networks, funding, general funding. They can lend their name and brand to the cause. They can pay for specific projects like public opinion polling, materials, events, paid media, youth stipends, etc. And they can also make in-kind contributions, such as covering the cost of a paid lobbyist. And I know that Minnesota has experience with this, so I'm going to turn it over to Leah.
Thank you, Alexis. I love this because it's so true for our campaign in Minnesota, where we had a wide range of people all playing to their different strengths and expertise. And so I think that was the magic to my favorite coalition ever. In big picture, we did have co-chairs for fast decision making, a steering committee of people who sort of had skin in the game in terms of time or resources, and then a variety of different teams or working groups, including lobbying, communications, and grassroots. And each of those was led and really centered around people who had that expertise. So a lot of the work was broken into those different teams. And really that was the key, was letting experts in each area lead, because no one has all of these areas in their wheelhouse. And so for us, a real game changer was hiring some really great contract lobbyists, and that just helped us navigate a higher level of leadership in terms of lawmakers and some of the negotiations, and when sticky situations happen, which unfortunately they usually do, helping us navigate through that. So that was a key investment. And also we did the same thing in terms of bringing on communications consultants, just to professionalize our work a little bit more and get everyone on the same page with talking points to help us get more media attention, all of that. So that stuff just pays off a ton in my experience.
Great. Well, I think another thing that's really important as you're setting up your coalition is to figure out your group agreements so that all coalition members really know how decisions, particularly around strategy, will be made. In my experience, this is less important in the beginning as the group is coming together, but becomes incredibly important as the pace of work and decision-making and legislative action steps up, and you have to make really time-sensitive decisions. So here is a checklist included in the guide of some things that you'll want to walk through and decide as a group. How will decisions be made? Are all group members considered equal? What strategic lines will the group not cross? Do all the members need to contribute resources? Do they need to do so equally? How will campaign materials like fact sheets and other pieces be written and approved? And will individuals be able to join the coalition, or is it only for organizations? As Leah kind of previewed, there's different ways of setting up your coalition model. Here are some examples of things that we've seen so far. A coalition where all members are equal and decisions are made by consensus or by majority vote. A model where one organization really leads the group. They may contribute more resources and then take the lead on decision-making and strategy. Or, as the case in Minnesota, 2 or more organizations are leading as co-chairs or a steering committee, and those groups play a larger role in strategy decisions. There's also several coalitions that break out into work groups so that a few members can really focus on things like policy writing, lobbying, communications, or grassroots outreach. And Alicia, I'll turn it over to you to talk about how this is working in North Carolina.
Thanks, Alexis. So in North Carolina with our coalition, we are represented by a leadership team of 4 organizations. My organization, the North Carolina Alliance for Health, has been working in school meal policy for many years. But when thinking about a School Meals for All policy and looking at funding, we knew that it had to be more than just us for something this robust. And we knew that we wanted to build a team of diverse organizations that were really representative of the whole state of North Carolina that also had different strengths. So like I said, we are led by 4 organizations. 2 of the organizations are considered the co-lead. So NCAH, along with the Center for Black Health and Equity, co-lead our coalition. And we are joined on the leadership team with the Carolina Hunger Initiative out of UNC, along with A Better Chance, A Better Community, which is a youth-led organization in one of our rural counties. The beauty of having a leadership team of a few organizations is that we get to play on our strengths. So NCAH is really strong in the policy work. Our lobbyists are contracted through NCAH, as well as more grass tops and organizational engagement. The Center for Black Health and Equity is incredibly strong at grassroots engagement, and they run our Champions program. A Better Chance, A Better Community is by definition youth-led. And so they are in charge of our Youth Ambassadors program and also partner with the center a lot on grassroots engagement. And then the Carolina Hunger Initiative is based out of UNC. And so by nature, they are in charge of our research that we do within the coalition, as well as they have really strong relationships with our school nutrition directors and programs, as they have been running summer meals programs for many years. So I think there's a lot of different ways that you can go about your model. And I think it just depends on your state and what you know will be the best option for you. For us, it was having co-leads so that we could share the responsibility of making sure that things run smoothly, and then having additional folks on the leadership team as well to help us guide the work.
Excellent. All right, well, another piece of this work is engaging students and people with lived experience. And Healthy School Meals for All is such a natural fit for authentically engaging youth as coalition members, campaign advisors, key informants, or even in paid roles. They know what's happening in their school cafeterias and what's working and not working with the current system. Some great activities for youth to be involved could include testifying at hearings, speaking at events, participating in lobby visits, and writing letters to the editor. So Leah, I'll turn it over to you to talk about your experience doing this.
Yeah, sort of back to what I was saying earlier about just having everyone play to their expertise. I just want to say that I think there is such an important role for lived expertise in that, and I equally think it's important to be compensating people for that. So that was sort of a core principle of ours in our campaign. That was both for youth and parents who have lived expertise in terms of struggling with the cost of school meals. For us, we started the process with doing some listening sessions, and that was in partnership again with on the ground organizations that sort of already have that trust established with different people that are experiencing food insecurity, if it's parents and those that work with youth and do youth leadership, and those that were really well connected to communities that we thought were most impacted by this topic. So we partnered with grassroots organizations. We gave them mini grants. They weren't huge, but I think they were still impactful. And then we worked to identify people to join our listening sessions, compensated them for those. And those listening sessions really led us to having key spokespeople that were identified and that wanted to stay engaged more in an ongoing way in the campaign. And so we just continued to work with them and turn to them and cultivate their stories and their experience and comfort with media, testimony, all the things. And they were just tremendous leaders that, you know, I was texting when the bill passed and that were probably the most happy of everyone because they understood how meaningful it was. So we really just built authentic relationships and then let people rise to their own leadership. But that's definitely, that's the number one thing I'm proud of in our campaign.
That's really great. Alicia, how is that similar or different than what you've done?
So I echo that, Leah. We also did some listening sessions. We called them community conversations, but we partnered with some grassroots organizations in different regions of the state to do some conversations around school meals. And it was interesting because the conversation and the questions were the same, but the themes were very different depending on what region of our state we were in. And like you said, we found some organic champions within those conversations that have remained active in the campaign. But I want to talk a little bit about engaging students. One of the really cool pieces of our campaign is our youth ambassador program. So like I said, ABC2 runs our youth ambassadors program. So I was asking Chester, who's the leader of that organization, what he'd like me to share during this time. And he said that probably one of the most important things is to ensure that you have student voice at the table from the very, very beginning. In the planning stages, as you're thinking about a campaign, as you're thinking about funding, have that student voice at the table from the get-go. For us specifically, our ambassadors are ranged in age all the way from 13 to 24. So we want to be sure that we are co-creating spaces for their voices to be heard, and also ensuring the tools and the training that they need to be able to not only engage in the conversation, but to lead the conversation. And when I say co-create spaces, I mean, we're not planning something and then inviting them to the space. We are inviting them to the planning of that, making sure that it is something that is fruitful for their communities that they are coming from, so that it really lands to home. We are also really careful to ensure that the projects that they are doing are fruitful and impactful for not only moving the policy forward, but also impactful for their individual power building. We always want to be sure that we are moving the policy forward, but there's also the consideration that we are activating the next generation of adult advocates. And so it is a very, very what's the word I'm looking for? Large opportunity to be able to work with these young leaders to help them to go into the next generation of advocacy. And finally, we find that it is important to compensate the young leaders for their work. Just like a job, they have requirements that they have to meet. They have meetings that they have to attend. And so compensating them for their work shows our gratitude, as well as giving them being equitable about their work that they are doing on behalf of the campaign.
Great. Well, I did not coordinate with either you or Chester, but everything that you just said there really mirrors nicely some tips that we have for working with youth and how to bring like good considerations to that. So excellent. Okay. So the next section really is writing your Healthy School Meals for All legislation. And the core components here are providing state funding to cover the difference between the federal reimbursements that the state will continue to get and the cost of offering free school meals to all students. It's important that your legislative language requires schools to maximize federal reimbursements through the community eligibility provision and provision 2, so that the policy is as affordable to the state as possible. The next tier here that I want to talk about is what we would consider like recommended components for your policy. The first would be to require all schools that use the National School Lunch Program to offer free meals to all students. So if you have a school in your state that's using NSLP, then they need to be a part of the state's free school meals for all program. Second, require all schools that use state funds to offer free meals to everyone to offer both breakfast and lunch. So there's no longer any schools that are just offering lunch. And then finally, including public schools, private schools as appropriate, and charter schools in the policy as eligible, really, expands the policy and makes free meals for all accessible to as many students as possible. And then this third tier, I would consider additional bill considerations. So there's other things that you can add to your policy to make school meals in your state as strong as possible. Some of these include requiring at least 20 minutes of seat time for students to eat lunch so that we know that they have enough time to eat the food that they're receiving. Requiring schools to offer breakfast after the bell, which we know significantly increases school breakfast participation. Another idea would be allocating funding for local food procurement or cafeteria equipment. And one last idea here is requiring schools to data match SNAP households for free school meals more often than the minimum requirement, which is 3 times a school year. But you could have your schools doing that data matching monthly, weekly, or if appropriate, even daily. And our full list of ideas that you could include in your policy, if it was appropriate for your state, are listed on page 14 of the guide. So Alicia, what went through your coalition's mind as you were crafting your language?
So I think this can change throughout the campaign, right? Depending on who is in office, if there's a switch at election time. So I just want to say, be really mindful of the language that that your legislators respond to. For us in North Carolina, our General Assembly is Republican led. So when we started talking about this work and we were talking about universal school meals or free school meals, that language did not land with our legislators. And so we made the shift to using no-cost school meals, and it was shocking the difference in response that made, just that one little language shift. So I would say just be really conscious of the language that you're using in your bills. Additional considerations, I think this is something that can change too. So when we initially started thinking about this work, we knew that this was going to be a slow process in North Carolina, and that still rings true 3 years later. But when we started thinking about this, we did not have anything in our language about farm to school or local procurement. That wasn't something that our legislators were interested in at the time. However, this session, farm to school and local procurement was incredibly appetizing for our legislators, and we actually ended up putting some farm to school language in our breakfast bill this time, and it had over 50 co-sponsors that were of the majority party. So just really being conscious of leveraging what your legislators care about, what has really great bipartisan support, and be willing to be a little bit, I hate to say flexible, but things can ebb and flow, and be okay with incremental steps, which we're going to talk about later. But yeah.
Yeah, those are really good tips. Thank you. Okay, next, determining the cost of the policy is something that will happen. And your state's budget office or your legislature's fiscal office has access to the data necessary to create an accurate and credible estimate for your state policy. At the same time, your campaign might want to map out what you think the cost will be just to inform your efforts. So here's some guidance to keep in mind. The first is that not all students will eat school meals, even when they are free. So if you take the number of students in your state and multiply it by the cost of providing them a breakfast and a lunch, you will drastically overestimate the cost of this policy. Second, you want to be sure that you are factoring in average daily attendance. And that means that not all enrolled students are present at school every day. So your legislature or state budget office likely already has an attendance factor, probably between 0.9 and 0.95, that they use when they do education-related financial modeling. And so you want to make sure that they're using an attendance factor when you think about how many kids will really be at school every day and possibly eating breakfast and lunch. Third, CEP schools are unlikely to see large participation changes because they're already offering free school meals to all of their students. But finally, school meal participation overall will increase significantly, and we've seen that in the first 8 states that have already implemented. This policy is incredibly needed and very appreciated, and students do participate in free school meal policies at a high rate. It turns out that participation during the COVID-19 pandemic, when meals were free for 2 years, wasn't a good indicator of participation for state policies, because during the pandemic, there were just so many different variables at play. So Lily, I will turn it over to you to talk about this topic.
Thank you. And I will say, coming to the cost of our policy has been quite the journey. A couple years ago, when we were running our School Meals for All bill, we got back a very inflated fiscal note. I think it was something of the tune of $700 million, and we only have about 1 million students. And that's not dividing out whether they're public school or private school or anything like that. So it was very inflated. And through that process, it was just a constant battle of trying to get this fiscal note lower to what we believed was more reasonable and we knew was more reasonable. And so a strategy that we used during that process was to have another legislator that we had built a strong relationship with to kind of behind the scenes run it as a separate fiscal note, and they ended up getting a different number back that was much lower and closer to the expected number. And through this process, we were working through our Department of Education, TSNA, all of those coalition partners that I was talking about earlier. We were all using every straw we had in our hat to see what was going on with this crazy fiscal note. I will say the response that we got to this fiscal note really influenced the path we took during this legislative cycle, where we're just focusing on the stepping stone of getting to school meals for all. That's, of course, our end goal. But just the political climate in Tennessee right now really was encouraging us to take a look at the reduced price category. And during that process, we didn't want the same thing to happen where we feel like we're scrambling. So we leaned on FRAC. We leaned on our partners at American Heart and got multiple different organizations to give us their fiscal estimate so that we knew if we had an inflated cost. We had 3 different reputable organizations saying they say differently. Luckily, somehow, the fiscal note was even lower than any of our partners estimated. So we were stay very encouraged by that. Of course, with federal noise, everything is subject to change, as we all know. But I think that an important part when looking at the cost is to go ahead and have the research done up front. And if you have other organizations that are at your disposal, really asking them to do the same, because I think more sources is always better.
Yes, that's really helpful. Thank you for walking us through all of that. So we've made a couple of nods here to incremental policy steps towards healthy school meals for all. So you may be in a state where you just don't see a path to passing healthy school meals for all right away. Or maybe that's how you start out. You're going for healthy school meals for all, but at some point in the legislative process, you realize it's impossible for this to pass this year, but there is an opportunity to make progress towards that goal. Here are some policies that would get you moving in that direction, and we've listed them here in order of what we think would be most impactful. So the first is to subsidize CEP eligible schools so that CEP is financially viable for more schools to use to offer free meals to all of their students. Washington and Oregon both have passed these policies. Next, offer school breakfast to all students at no charge. So you're not doing breakfast and lunch, but you're starting with breakfast. That's what Arkansas and Pennsylvania currently do. Next, you could increase eligibility for free school meals. So right now, children are eligible for free meals if their household is at 130% of the federal poverty level. You could expand that up to 200%, which North Dakota has done temporarily, 224% like New Jersey, or up to 300% like Oregon has done, or whatever number makes sense for your state. Fourth, you could eliminate the reduced priced copay, because there are a lot of students that fall within that category, up to 185% of the federal poverty line, that are very in need of free school meals. I once heard a food service director say, if you think that the 40-cent copay for lunch isn't a barrier to participating, then you don't understand hunger in America. So there are a lot of households where that copay is a barrier for them. So what you can do is give them access to free school meals instead of having to pay the reduced priced copay. And then finally, an option is to create a school meal debt policy that prohibits shaming students for carrying unpaid meal debt during the school year. So Alicia, what are your thoughts on incremental policy steps?
I'm trying to talk and I'm muted. I think depending on your state, incremental steps are going to be just a part of the reality. And that's what we found in North Carolina. When we started this campaign, of course, we were hopeful, but we knew that with the political landscape, we would likely be doing incremental steps as well. We have a Democratic governor and a Republican-led General Assembly, and this was true when our campaign started as well. And so while our governors have been generally incredibly supportive of school meals for all, our General Assembly has been a little bit more hesitant. So for us, over a decade ago, the General Assembly funded the reduced price breakfast copay, and that has remained in recurring funds since. We continued working, and in 2023, we went in with a larger goal, but towards the end of the session, and we were starting to see that there wasn't as much funding available, we ended up with a win of the reduced price lunch copay. We also had the meal debt language put in place, so no student could be held back from graduation or their transcripts withheld due to meal debt. And our legislators also started the CEP meal incentive program. And this is essentially just filling the gap for those districts that are eligible for CEP but couldn't quite financially make it work. The caveat to this was in the language of that program, it prioritizes districts that have a CEP or an ISP of 55% or higher. The good news is that word prioritizes gave our Department of Public Instruction a little bit of wiggle room, and we ended up having around 90,000 students gain access to no-cost meals through that program. Now, this year is our first year that we've had a Republican champion come out and help us to propose a bill. Representative Biggs in our House of Representatives proposed a universal breakfast bill. And that's what we were going for this session, was a universal breakfast bill. We knew that there wasn't a lot of funding to work with, but we wanted to do something that was going to give us the biggest bang for the buck. And we knew breakfast had the research to back that up. As the process was moving through and Representative Biggs was looking for co-sponsors, it came up that there was an appetite for farm to school, like I was talking about a few minutes ago. So a $5 million appropriation was added to that. As expected, the bill didn't move forward in the legislative process, but we didn't anticipate it to. What it did do was that it showed support of the legislators. There were I want to say over the exact number is slipping me, but over 100 representatives that showed support for that bill. But it also gave us a placeholder in the budget moving forward. So we are at a place in our session when there's no end date, so they're continuing to work. But where we sit right now is having a $2.5 million appropriation for fresh fruits and vegetable purchasing. That was proposed in the House budget. So they are deciding if they're going to consider new appropriations. But that's where we sit right now. We are still in the game, even though it's not the full package of what we want. And so where we have to land as a coalition is for us specifically, as a really strong agriculture state, it's important that we are leveraging what we can that has bipartisan support and continues to move the needle towards school meals for all. And in a place where we have just lost funding for local foods for schools and some of the other things from USDA, the appropriation for fresh fruits and vegetables feels like a win, and we're happy with that. So one thing that we have considered as a coalition, when we're talking about incremental steps, is when we're talking with partners and we're talking to community members, it can get really, really confusing when our campaign is working on school meals for all. And then all of a sudden, okay, it's just universal breakfast. And then it's farm to school. It can get really, really confusing. And so we are very mindful to, in our communications, always talk about school meals for all as the big picture goal. That is the goal. That is the gold star. But we have to have really open conversations with our coalition and our partners about incremental steps and discussing the realities in our political climate, and that things happen really quickly with legislators, and any small thing that moves the needle even 1 inch closer is a win, and we celebrate it.
Yes, and I like that you're reminding us to frame any of these steps as a step towards the ultimate goal, not a success or end in and of themselves. And I also think this highlights how important those group agreements are that we talked about earlier when we start having these conversations. All right, well, sometimes a legislative champion will find you before you have a chance to find your ideal person. Someone will introduce their own Healthy School Meals for All bill. But in a lot of cases, you get to look around for who in your state legislature is really going to be the best voice on this issue. So if you have that opportunity, here are some things to think about when you look for people. Is the person passionate about the topic, Healthy School Meals for All? Do they have lived experience that they can lend to the issue? Can they successfully get other legislators to co-sponsor the bill? Does Healthy School Meals for All fit within their general portfolio of legislation that they're trying to move forward? Are they serving on relevant committees to the bill? Do they have the capacity and interest to be a champion for this and shepherd it through the legislative process? And are they interested in working with you and other subject matter experts to really develop the best bill possible? So I want to give a shout out here to, in the photo, California Policy Champion, Senator Nancy Skinner, and then turn it over to Lily.
Yeah, so I think this is going to be another walkthrough of years past to now. So back to the $700 million bill, that was definitely a situation in which the representative and senator, they had introduced that before we had a chance to have our look around, I suppose. And again, Tennessee is a Republican supermajority. And so we can count on the Democrats every year to introduce a school meals for all bill. But what was great about this is that they were both Republicans. And so it felt like, oh, we have a chance. Through this process, though, we were getting specifically our House representative. He was very engaged, was talking to everyone about it. He was a former educator, and I believe his wife is an educator as well. So he really had a heart for this. But as session was going on, there was behind the scenes drama in our General Assembly. This most recent session, we just had a special session that was trying to pass and did pass school vouchers. And so this was a year or two before that, really leading up to our governor trying to get this piece of legislation passed. And as a former public educator, he was very staunchly against this. And I think it was the day or the week before it was voted on in its first committee, this representative had a conversation with the governor and leadership and said, I'm not going to vote for vouchers. And with that, the bill died. And so moving into our current session, we continued to have conversations with this representative. He was very supportive. He said that he did not want to directly sponsor any legislation that was not school meals for all. And even with that, he said, I don't think that this is, I don't think I'm your best player at this point in time, which is very self-aware of him. And so we had maybe a week before deadlines were due. We're scrambling for our sponsors. This is also when it was really great to lean on our coalition members. Since we have specifically Second Harvest Food Bank, it's Second Harvest Food Bank of Northeast Tennessee, which we're located in Nashville and is like 5 hours away. So our partner with Second Harvest has done a really phenomenal job of keeping the Northeast delegation engaged in their work around hunger, and specifically scoping out who she thinks could be a good champion. And so looking at a Senate sponsor, we found him first, but he was a freshman. So he was a freshman, and he got elected also being anti-voucher. But he was also a pharmacist. His children were in public schools. The second we sat down with him, he was engaged and excited and asking thoughtful questions. And so it's definitely with him, it felt a little bit more like a risk. But he's proven to be very engaged, very excited, trying to get us meetings with the governor, talking to people any chance he gets. He's very proud about it. And I would say if you look at his bio, you would be absolutely floored that this man is wanting to support universal school meals for children. So I say that to say, don't write anybody off. Sometimes you have to deal with the cards you're dealt. And in this case, he specifically definitely worked in our favor and continues to work in our favor, and we're very grateful for that. With our house sponsor, she also was found through one of our coalition partners through American Heart, who was a previous legislative aide and is now a lobbyist for American Heart. So she really has the knowledge and the relationships built with these legislators to point them out in a crowd and say, they'll support it, they won't, they'll support it, they won't. And so again, we were getting down to the wire, and she goes and has a conversation with this representative, and it was the same serendipity moment of they're so engaged, they're excited. The meeting goes over 15 minutes, which is amazing because usually I feel like people are rushing me out of their office. And as we get to know her, we come to find out that she has this really powerful personal story about how actually her daughter was relying on free school meals and reduced price meals. And her grandchild actually racked up school meal debt that her daughter couldn't pay off due to personal circumstances. And so she gave a very tearful explanation during a committee as this bill was being heard that really made an impact. And again, if you looked at her bio, you would be absolutely floored that she's standing with us. So I think it's really important to, I think trust your intuition. There are some people that, as much as we would like to, we're not necessarily going to get through to them in the time that we have. But it's also important to keep an open mind and to approach every person as an individual. I think if we're all in this work, we like to be prepared and know what we're getting into going into it. But again, looking any of the information that I could have gotten about them online would have told me that this conversation was going to go horribly, and that was not the case. So I think it's really just about having an open mind, being willing to work with people, having your core principles, but also knowing where you're willing to compromise or go with the flow, has really been key in getting these legislators to work with us and not against us.
I really like the message of getting to know people and hearing their stories and how they could overlap with this issue. That's helpful. All right, well, another piece that is likely top of mind is how to fund your campaign. And this is critical because things that successful coalitions and campaigns do, like have dedicated staff time, place earned in social media, conduct public opinion polling, create compelling materials, spend a significant amount of time lobbying, host some events, perhaps branded with some swag, provide some of the partner stipends that Alicia and Leah talked about, etc. It all takes money. So To date, some of the Healthy School Meals for All campaigns have received funding from sources such as their coalition member operating budgets, food manufacturing and marketing companies, foundations with a focus on health or child nutrition, and health insurance companies. Some considerations for campaign funding that you might take is, will the funder be a member of the coalition? Will they allow you to retain decision-making authority in the campaign, which is, I think, just critical. Will they be able to support direct and grassroots lobbying? Will they be on board with additional groups supporting the campaign if they're not able to cover the entire cost themselves? Can they help recruit other funders to help fully cover the cost of the campaign? Will they offer unrestricted funds that allow flexibility to use the dollars as needed? And will they provide funding for multiple years if that is what is needed? Because a lot of these campaigns don't happen in just 1 year. So the answers to all of these questions may vary, but they're things to know ahead of time before you accept the money, particularly around retaining decision-making authority, that I think are important to know going into the relationship. And Leah, do you want to talk about how campaign funding worked for Minnesota?
Yeah, first I just want to say this is such a great list of questions. They all resonate with me and are important kind of to that beginning of the discussion as you're setting things up. So in Minnesota, I will say that we were so grateful and lucky to have support from initially Blue Cross Blue Shield, and then additionally General Mills shortly thereafter. Blue Cross helped us get that second funder on board, and they were really great to work with. I think helped us have easy answers to some of the questions that you just laid out, Alexis. And I do want to acknowledge that raising money for this type of work isn't easy. It wasn't when we did it, and I think it's probably harder now. So I do acknowledge that that this is hard. It's hard to get the level of funding that you want and need to have a successful campaign. But I do believe that that in order to be successful, you need dedicated time and expertise to these efforts. At a minimum, if you're not quite there yet, I think just at least knowing that you need a staff person's plate to be cleared to focus on this. It's really hard to juggle other things if you're in the heat of an active campaign like this, or clear half of two people's plates, or whatever it looks like. But I think for us, it's really that dedicated staff time. We couldn't have done it without that. And then, like I already mentioned, bringing in some experts, because you're not going to have everything in-house no matter where you're based. So I don't actually have a ton more to say. I think you have all the key points here, but it's a really important part of it.
Great. Well, and previous conversations with you have informed this bulleted list, so it all goes around. But thank you for those additional thoughts. So the guide walks through some pretty common campaign activities, and those include advocacy days at the Hill, or excuse me, at the Capitol, virtual days of action, listening sessions with community members and policymakers, and we've heard from some of our speakers how impactful those can be, and even policymaker site visits to school cafeterias, which I think can also be another really meaningful interaction and a turning point for some people. So the guide goes through details of how to set up those different activities. And one thing I want to stress is sometimes it is the relatively easy, low budget, easy lift activities that can really move the needle. And to me, one of those examples that several campaigns have done is coming up with a nice looking postcard, going out into the community and asking people to write down their reasons for why they would like to see free school meals for all students in the state. Displaying them at events, possibly like you see in the photo on the right, and then getting those to elected officials. And so, Alicia, I think you wanted to talk about how you've done this. The photos that people are seeing on the screen are from New York and from Minnesota, and this is something that would work in a lot of places.
Yeah, so we really like postcards. This is something that we kind of keep on hand. We have used these in community event settings. We've used them at professional conferences. It's a really, like you said, low budget and easy way to have people share their stories. I think that sharing your story can be really daunting. Doing it in an op-ed or doing it on a TV media segment, that feels like a lot. But writing it down on a postcard that is being sent directly to your legislator where they can read that and see the impact, that feels a lot less daunting. So I think one cool thing about postcards is that it can be used in a number of different ways. It can be used for really specific messaging, or it can just be used for general education for legislators. So having a place where people can write their story, but on the other side, having a really powerful quote or a really powerful talking point that fits your messaging at the time. So highly recommend these. Our communities love them. And our legislators do as well.
Great. All right. If your campaign has the opportunity to conduct state-specific public opinion polling, I think it can be really important. Back in 2021, FRAC was able to do some nationwide public opinion polling and message testing. And at the time, we found that 63% of voters nationwide supported the idea of healthy school meals for all. Since then, it has been so fun to see state campaigns be able to do their own state-specific polling and find numbers much higher than 63%. I'm not going to read through all the numbers here, but you can see they are high. And legislators in general love to support issues that are popular with constituents, and this issue certainly is one. And when you get a really great polling number, you can put it in a nice graphic to promote, like School Meals for All North Carolina did. And anything that you're able to do with message testing can inform how you talk about this issue in your specific state. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Leah.
Yeah, so this was definitely a key investment for us in Minnesota, and I think really for two key reasons. First, like you were already saying, Alexis, I think it's really important to be highlighting that even if you're struggling to get bipartisan support for this cause among lawmakers, there likely is bipartisan support in community. And so I think making that connection has been really important for us. And I will say, honestly, to this day, as we're now working to defend universal meals in Minnesota and under an increasingly tight budget scenario, we're reminding people that this is not the issue you want to pick on, right? It's very popular, and that is true across party lines. So it's really key to be able to say that and to say it with some backing of polling is great. And then the other thing for us, getting, especially if you have a diverse coalition and people with different perspectives and style preferences, getting everyone sort of coalesced around key talking points can be a process. So if it's not about, well, no, I think this is our key message, if it's really about what does the polling say, right? It's not anyone's opinion. It's what resonates the most. That helped us. It really helped guide us because there are a lot of reasons that you want to, that we all want to see school meals for all, but we learned, despite us having wonderful champions in the health arena, for example, it was really more about making the connection to academics that was persuasive to a lot of our community. So we needed to cultivate those stakeholders and really nail that talking point. The same with people just having a strong sense that schools have a key role to play in providing access to healthy food. So when we learned what resonated most, that just helped us clarify what our talking points were that needed to rise to the top. And that helped us, I think, create some discipline and consistency, no matter who was talking, that we were hitting the same key points. So that's just another really great benefit. And even if it's not a huge, long, extensive poll, it can be simple. If you can grab a few key nuggets like that, it really pays off.
I love that point because sometimes your intuitive hunches are right and sometimes they're a little off, and polling and message testing gives you the clear answer. That's a great point. To the point of messaging, we're not going to go through all of them, but the guide includes 2 pages of messages that do seem to resonate across states. But if you have the money to do message testing, you can really narrow in on what are the best ones for you. So check those out. And then something that we think is important is really talking about framing these policies as investments. And this is a great example of how New York did this after their policy passed. New York made a historic investment and commitment to children. And so Alicia, why don't you give us your short thought on why this phrasing is so important?
So we think this is important because in conversations, we've seen that legislators want to know what their return on investment is going to be. And so not only is it important to talk about it from an academic perspective, but think bigger. What is the community impact? What effect is this going to have on building a workforce down the line with educated workers? What economic impact is this going to have on the community by keeping funds in the state from local procurement, and then having the appropriate messengers to do that. So having folks from the workforce to talk about workforce, having economic impact talked about from folks in farmers and business owners. So just being really careful about that messaging. So yeah.
Yep, I completely agree. All right, in the guide, we have a list of kind of communication opportunities that are natural fits for this issue. And I'm going to keep going just because I'm looking at time here. And so we also think it's really important to collect great quotes of support when you're out in the community, and you can compile them and then use them on social or in testimony or whenever it's appropriate. And then some other areas that are covered in the guide include responding to opposition messages, submitting letters to the editor, a few case studies on states that have passed policies, some notes about bill signing events and celebration, and then also some things to keep in mind as you're implementing your policy. And so, Leah, I'm going to turn it to you for one of our final thoughts here, because I wanted to just end on a note of conveying like how much joy there can be in this work. Although these campaigns take a lot of resources and time, the end result can be so meaningful. And I know you wanted to share like how this organic moment came together at the bill signing event in Minnesota.
Sure. First, I'll confess that I was sort of struggling with the fact that we had to limit how many partners we could have in the room if we were hosting this in the bill signing in a public school. And I was wrong. It was worth it to have that limitation so that we could have just a room full of young people for that bill signing. So even though we had to really pick and choose who got to be there, we got to have kids front and center. And yeah, this moment with our governor, just like a lot of people have asked me if it was staged or how we planned it. We did not. These kids wanted to hug this man as he signed the bill. And he was a former teacher, so I think he's got good energy that kids trust. But yeah, he brought them all in close and was explaining what he was doing and what it meant as he was signing the bill. And then one kid just like couldn't contain herself anymore and grabbed him, and then they all did. So this is a very organic moment of kids being happy that we passed School Meals for All in Minnesota.
Very, very cool. All right, so I just want to end by thanking everybody for coming today. I hope you learn a lot. I hope the guide is a useful tool to you as you put together your coalitions and campaigns, and we can't wait to see what state is going to be next in joining the cohort of 9 states that currently have Healthy School Meals for All policies, and many more states that are on that path. So that is what we have. And I really want to thank Alicia, Lily, and Leah for everything that you have added to the conversation today. We really appreciate it. And that's a wrap. Thank you.